Welcome to Mr. Disturbing. Tonight, we're plunging into the dark heart of the Appalachians with some truly unsettling true horror stories. That'll keep you up all night. If you're brave enough, smash that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next descent into fear. My name is David Kane. I'm 36 years old, and until last year I was a seasonal caretaker for abandoned forestry cabins across southern West Virginia, the kind of scattered shelters you find halfway up a mountain slope, untouched for years at a time, used occasionally by researchers or rangers when the weather's bad or trail conditions don't allow for a return trip. Most of the work was dull but peaceful, cleaning out nests, checking for roof damage, hauling in dry wood before the winter storms sealed off access, and I'd taken the job after my brother Ben disappeared in the same region almost 6 years ago. I never told anyone that part, never filed a request for transfer or investigation, because somewhere in my gut I knew he hadn't vanished from the map. He'd vanished from something deeper than that. And this past November, when I was assigned to inspect an unlisted shelter near a stretch called Low Hollow, I knew the moment I saw the coordinates that it was the same slope he'd been hiking when he sent me his final voicemail. The message had been short, garbled, just static and the sound of water dripping. But there was something else too, something low and rhythmic, a pulsing noise like someone tapping bone against stone in slow, deliberate patterns. I kept the voicemail, never deleted it, though no one else could hear the tapping when I played it back, only me. They said it was water interference or line degradation, but I knew better, because I'd heard that same sound once before when I was a kid, and Ben dared me to sleep in the old quarry outside Oak Branch, the one that had filled with rainwater decades ago and still made the local dogs whine whenever you got near it. That night I heard it, echoing up from below. That same pattern, soft, wet, deliberate. I told myself I was imagining it, just fear playing tricks. But now I was driving up the old fire road toward Low Hollow, and the trees were closing in thicker than they had on any other route, like the woods didn't want the path to stay open, like they were trying to grow it shut behind me. I parked at the last mile marker and walked the remaining stretch with my gear slung over one shoulder. The cabin wasn't on any USFS registry, no markings, just a hand-drawn square on an old paper map that looked like it had been photocopied 100 times. No one could tell me who built it or when, and there were no satellite images because the canopy was too dense. But I found it just before dark, a one-room timber frame with a rusted tin roof and moss grown thick along the seams of the door. It leaned slightly eastward like it had started to sink on one side, but the structure held, and when I stepped inside, the air was warmer than it should have been. Stale, but not cold, like something had been breathing in there recently. There were no personal belongings, just a cot, a rusted basin, and a single wooden chair facing the far wall where someone had carved hundreds of overlapping spirals, some shallow, some deep enough to expose bare wood. The floor had no dust, which made no sense because the entire place was sealed and hadn't seen a visitor in years. And that's when I noticed the stone, a single round rock sitting exactly in the center of the floor, dark gray, smooth, with 7 thin cracks radiating outward like spider legs. I walked around it slowly, not touching it, and the moment I passed between it and the spiraled wall, I felt something shift in my chest. Not pain exactly, but pressure. Like the air had thickened or changed direction without moving, I backed away, opened a window for ventilation, and took a few photos for documentation. But when I looked at them on my phone, the stone wasn't there. The floor showed as empty, perfectly bare, but in every image, there was a faint distortion, like a heat ripple, circular, centered on where the rock had been. I closed the window, tried not to panic, and reminded myself I was alone, tired, and dealing with the weight of memory. I marked my log and prepped the cot, planning to hike out first thing in the morning, but sleep didn't come, not really. I'd drift off for seconds at a time, only to wake up with the overwhelming certainty that something had just exhaled behind me. I checked the door, still locked, but the pressure in the room kept growing, like I'd stepped into the middle of an enormous lung. And just before 3 a.m. I heard it. The tapping, slow, deliberate, stone on stone, not from the roof or walls but beneath me, coming from under the floorboards. I stayed frozen for what felt like an hour, heart pounding, not moving, barely breathing. And then the tapping stopped, and the stone was gone. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I just sat there in the dim light of my flashlight, sweeping it slowly across the floor, across the corners, across the empty patch where the stone had been. And every time I blinked, I expected it to be back. Not because I thought I'd imagined it, but because it had moved on its own. Not shifted, not rolled, moved, like it had been pulled downward or phased out of place. And with each hour, the air grew heavier, the walls darker, even though nothing in the cabin changed. And I kept hearing faint ticks beneath the boards, not constant but rhythmic. And it reminded me of breathing. Not mine, not mammal breathing, but the kind of slow inhale you feel from something bigger, deeper, something old enough to forget how lungs work. By dawn, I was packed, out the door and halfway down the trail before I even realized I hadn't eaten, hadn't drunk anything, hadn't documented the night like I was supposed to. The forest felt tight, like it had moved in while I slept, branches lower, moss thicker, and not a single bird made a sound. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was deliberate. And as I reached the spot where the fire road met the trailhead, I saw something leaning against the front tire of my truck. The stone, upright, clean, with one of the cracks gone, like it had sealed itself shut. I approached slowly, knees locked, and noticed that the truck was covered in prints. Not footprints, not boots or paws, but handprints. Small, dozens of them, like a child had walked around pressing their palms against the sides, the windows, the mirrors, smudging the glass with skin that left no oil, no grime, just the faint trace of contact. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I got in and drove, fast, eyes on the mirror the whole way back to town. And I didn't stop until I hit the ranger station where I dropped the key and didn't say a word. I told myself I'd file a report later. I told myself maybe I was overtired. Maybe I'd hallucinated the whole thing. But I knew I hadn't. Because that night back in my apartment, I played Ben's last voicemail again. And for the first time in years, the static was gone. The line was clear, the message short. Just 6 words whispered in a voice that wasn't his. It's moving now because you listened. I dropped the phone, didn't sleep. And when I woke the next day, there was a package at my door. No return label, just a cloth-wrapped object inside. And when I unwrapped it, the stone was there again, this time with 3 cracks sealed, the rest glowing faintly like something beneath the surface was pushing outward. I brought it to work, locked it in the equipment locker, left it overnight, and the next morning it was sitting on my office chair. No one had touched it. No one had keys but me. And now the spirals from the cabin wall had started appearing on the inner lid of my lunchbox, on my mirrors, once even scratched faintly into the frost on my bathroom window. And the worst part was I could feel it now, not just in dreams, but in places where it shouldn't exist. In my ears when the house was quiet, in my chest when I stood too long near stone walls, in my teeth whenever I passed a cemetery or touched an old well, a pulling sensation, like someone was whispering inside the bones of the earth and my body had started to recognize the language. I quit the job, deleted all my field notes, moved east to a small rental outside Richmond and tried to forget, but it didn't matter. The dreams kept coming, not violent, not frightening. Just repetitive, endless stone corridors, spirals on walls, the sound of tapping far away but moving closer. And sometimes I'd wake with dried dirt under my fingernails, gravel in my sheets, once even a smear of moss across the bottom of my pillow, and 2 weeks ago the radio in my truck stopped working. Not suddenly, just slowly replaced by a new frequency, low and deep. Not music, not voice, just that same rhythmic sound I'd heard in the voicemail, like wet stone clicking together beneath a river. And I started seeing things in puddles, reflections that didn't match mine, outlines in glass that didn't blink when I did, and every time I caught my breath, I felt that pressure again. Not fear, not panic, just the feeling of being watched by something that had always been watching but had only recently decided to let me know. And then 2 nights ago, I found the spiral carved into the floor of my hallway. Not scratched, carved deep, with fresh dust along the edges like it had been done recently, and next to it, in a clean circle on the hardwood, was the stone, now with 5 cracks sealed, and a low warmth radiating from its surface like it had been sitting in sunlight. I don't know what happens when all 7 cracks close. I don't want to know. But I think Ben knew. I think he saw it too. And whatever he did in that cabin, whatever he uncovered, he passed it to me. Maybe by accident, maybe on purpose. And maybe that voicemail wasn't a warning. Maybe it was an invitation. I stayed awake for 38 hours after that last time the stone appeared, watching the hallway, door locked, phone off, every window covered, and yet the light kept dimming throughout the apartment. Even though the power stayed on, the clocks ran slow, the fridge hummed out of rhythm, and the walls made soft creaking noises like they were breathing inward, like the building itself was preparing to kneel to something underground. And on the second night, when exhaustion finally closed my eyes, I didn't dream. Not exactly. It was like slipping through water that had shape and memory. And when I opened them again, I was in the woods, not outside my apartment, not in any place I recognized, just a clearing I hadn't seen since I was a child, the quarry near Oak Branch, where Ben dared me to sleep overnight when we were 12, and where I first heard the tapping. And I swear it looked the same as it had back then, except this time the water was gone, drained, and in its place was a spiral etched into the stone floor like a scar, and in the center was the stone, whole now, all cracks sealed, its surface like polished bone, and I knew I wasn't dreaming because the air smelled like the rain before lightning, and the silence hurt my ears like pressure on a plane. I tried to turn, but my body wouldn't respond. I wasn't paralyzed, just occupied, like something was watching through me, and when I looked up, the trees around the quarry had moved, not blown by wind, not snapped or felled, just shifted, growing in a tight ring, all facing inward, their bark warped into patterns that looked like ribs and faces, like screaming mouths pressed against the wood from inside, and something was walking between them, slowly, dragging one long arm behind it. And even though I couldn't see its face, I knew it was Ben. Not as I remembered him, not as he was in photos, but as something the stone had remade from his shadow, thinner, taller, bent in the center like his spine had folded into itself, and I could hear his breath, raspy and low and wet, like lungs filled with gravel, and he was whispering, not to me, but to the stone, and I couldn't understand the words, but the spiral began to rotate, not physically, not like it turned, but like my mind shifted and reoriented around it until I didn't know which direction was up anymore, and I felt myself sliding, not down, but inward, pulled into some place that didn't care if it was beneath dirt or above clouds, a space where time was circular and thought was echo, and for 1 second I saw what it sees, the places where stone remembers every step ever taken above it. The layers of bone and metal and memory that we bury in mountains and forget are still listening, still breathing, still waiting. And I understood then that the stone wasn't a curse or a relic or a message. It was a doorway, a key, and once it closed its last crack, it could open something else, something older, something wide, and I screamed. Not with my voice, but with my thoughts, with everything that was still me. And I must have clawed my way out because when I woke, I was back in my hallway, face down, mouth full of splinters, fingernails cracked, and across the room was the stone, now pulsing with slow light, like the beat of a sleeping heart, no longer smooth but marked with a final symbol, a handprint carved into its top. And when I reached for it, I realized the skin on my palm was missing, peeled like wax, a perfect match for the mark, and I finally understood what it wanted, what it had always wanted. Not just to be found, not just to be seen, but to be held, because once it touches you, it doesn't let go. It follows. It folds space around you, warps time to pull you closer to its center. And I think that's why no one ever found Ben. Not because he vanished, but because he stepped fully into the spiral, into the stone. And now it wants me to do the same. And I can feel it every night now, through the walls, through the floor, through the ground beneath this building, tapping softly, steadily, the same rhythm I heard in his voicemail, the same tempo in my dreams. And last night I found a spiral drawn on the underside of my tongue, faint but growing darker, and when I looked in the mirror, the reflection didn't move when I did. It stood still and watched, and its eyes weren't mine, they were his, Ben's, hollow and patient and full of stone. And I know I don't have much time left. I can feel my thoughts slowing, my words unraveling, and I hear whispers behind every sound now, voices speaking backwards, telling me the names of mountains no map shows anymore, and I write this not as a warning but as a tether. So if you ever find a stone like the one I've described, smooth and gray with cracks that heal, leave it where it is, do not touch it, do not listen to the sound it makes beneath your bed, and if you already have, then I'll see you soon, beneath the spiral where the breath of the earth never ends, and the tapping is the only thing that still remembers who you were. My name is Thomas Reed. I'm 43, and I've spent most of my adult life working as a maintenance technician for a small railroad company based out of Charleston, West Virginia, mostly on call to inspect and repair old freight routes that snake into the Appalachian Mountains, some of which haven't seen regular use in over 30 years, but are still technically operational and legally required to be maintained. I never minded the work. It kept me moving, gave me an excuse to disappear into the forest for a few days at a time, sometimes with a company truck. Sometimes on foot when the terrain got too rough. I liked the quiet, the isolation, and the sense that I was walking along a path that used to matter, that used to carry things and people and stories. Even if all that was gone now, most of the time I'd go weeks without anything out of the ordinary, just warped rails, washed out ballast, the usual weather damage. But early last fall, I was sent out to verify a track sensor alarm deep in the Greenbrier stretch, a warning that had triggered repeatedly for 5 days in a row, despite no trains scheduled and no logs showing any motion or mechanical failures. The line hadn't been active since 1997 and was mostly buried beneath overgrowth, but company policy required eyes on it before we could deactivate the alert permanently. The nearest road was 12 miles off, and the drone team was grounded due to early fog season. So I packed light, took the main line east to Raynell, then hiked in from there, following the old rail bed as best I could through the brush and fallen limbs. The further in I went, the thicker the fog became. Even by mountain standards, it was strange. High saturation, low ceiling, no wind to push it around. It clung to the trees and hovered above the ground like a second canopy, never dispersing, never fading. And after about 4 miles, I realized something wasn't right. Not in a dramatic way, but subtly. Like the incline didn't feel right, or the temperature never changed, or the birds stopped making sound even though I hadn't noticed them to begin with, and I kept checking my watch, but it always said the same time, 10:46 a.m., no matter how long I walked, no matter how far I moved. And I would have thought the battery died, but the second hand was still ticking. Always ticking. 1 beat per second. Never slowing. Never stopping. Just repeating the same minute over and over while the sun above the mist never shifted, never warmed. And after another hour of walking, I came across a switch stand, half buried in vines and rot, the kind they used to install for manual turnout changes. Only this one was turned the wrong way, toward a split that shouldn't have existed. The track ahead of me forked left, even though the map showed a dead straight line for the next 10 miles, and the split track looked newer somehow, less corroded, less overgrown, like it had been cleared recently by something that didn't leave prints or tool marks, and for reasons I can't explain, I followed it. Not because I was curious, but because I didn't want to turn my back to it. The track curved gently north and ran beneath an outcrop that formed a shallow tunnel, barely 10 feet long. And on the other side, the air changed, thicker, heavier, not colder, but still making me shiver. And as I passed through, I noticed that the tunnel walls were carved with dozens of deep, narrow gouges, not cracks, not damage, but scratches, long and deliberate, like claws dragged through damp stone, not frenzied but patient, methodical, and spaced too far apart to have been made by human hands. And when I emerged, I realized the fog was gone, not thinner, just absent, replaced by a still grayness that wasn't light or dark, just constant. And I couldn't hear anything except my own footsteps, not even my breath. And the track beneath me ended suddenly in a trestle, one I had never seen on any chart, stretching over a narrow gorge that didn't exist on any elevation map. And on the far side of the gorge was a small station, wood siding, tin roof, long platform. The kind you'd see in the 1930s before the line was ever electrified, and I knew instantly that it shouldn't be there, not just because of the age or condition, but because the station was waiting, not abandoned, not forgotten, just paused, like it had been set aside and left to wait for something to return. And I felt my knees lock, not from fear, but from recognition, because I'd seen it once before, when I was 11 years old, in a dream I'd never been able to forget, where I stood on that same platform and watched a train arrive that never stopped, its windows black, its wheels silent. And when I woke up, my bed was soaked with mud. I stood on the threshold of that platform for what felt like hours, not moving, not thinking, just watching the windless air ripple faintly around the edges of the building. The wood siding looked too clean, too straight, not weathered like the trees behind it or the rotted ties beneath my boots. It wasn't freshly painted. It wasn't maintained, but it hadn't aged the way it should have, like time had passed around it instead of through it. And I felt the same pull I had when I stepped off the main line, not from curiosity or wonder, but from something deeper, like gravity, but not physical, like the weight of unfinished memory dragging me forward, and I stepped onto the platform with a kind of quiet reverence, like walking into a room where someone was sleeping and might wake up angry if you made too much sound. The boards beneath me didn't creak, didn't bend, didn't even echo. And when I reached the door, it swung open on its own, not violently, not creaking, just gently, like it had been waiting for me and wanted to save me the trouble. The room inside was long and narrow, benches lining each wall, ticket window at the far end, the old brass kind with sliding panels and no glass, and in the center of the room was a single wooden crate, open at the top, filled with stones, small, round, gray, all the same size, all packed tightly like they belonged there, like they were inventory. And the moment I stepped inside, I felt the change. Not temperature, not pressure, but perception, like the inside of the station wasn't the same size as it looked from the outside, like the space had folded in on itself once or twice before settling, and the ticket window rattled once, gently, not from movement, but from attention, like something on the other side had just turned toward me, and I took a step back, but the door had closed, and the light filtering through the windows wasn't changing, just holding steady at a dim gray, like the last second before a storm rolls in, but never quite arrives. And then the sound began, faint at first, almost a vibration, coming from below. The same clicking I'd heard on the track sensor audio, not metal on metal, but stone on stone, steady, rhythmic, like a pulse being tapped out in code. And I realized then that the crate of stones was vibrating, each one moving slightly against the other, almost imperceptibly, but together, forming a pattern. And I didn't want to understand it. I didn't want to see what it was spelling, but part of me already did, because I'd seen it before, when I was a child, in that dream. When the train came without sound and the fog didn't lift and the windows were filled with faces that didn't blink, and I turned to leave, but the door didn't open. And the window behind the ticket booth was no longer empty. There was something on the other side now, not a person, not an animal, but a shape, symmetrical, tall, with shoulders that didn't move, and a head that leaned slightly left, as if it were listening. And though I couldn't see its face, I could feel the pressure of its gaze, heavy and cold and old, not malevolent, but not human either. Like something that had existed long before people learned what fear was, and I backed away until I hit the bench and sat down hard, heart racing, ears ringing, and the sound beneath the floor grew louder, more urgent, still that same rhythm, like a countdown or a heartbeat. And I looked at the crate again and saw that one of the stones had risen, just slightly, as if waiting to be picked up, as if meant for me. And the moment I thought of that, I knew the truth, that this place wasn't abandoned, wasn't forgotten. It had been left for me, or for someone like me, for someone who had brushed up against the edge of the fog and carried a sliver of it inside without realizing. And this was where that sliver came to finish what it started. I stood slowly, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. And I reached into the crate and lifted the stone, and it was warm, not like sun-warmed rock, but like skin, like it had blood inside. And when I held it, the sound stopped, all at once, like someone had lifted a needle from a record, and the station was silent, utterly and completely silent. And in that silence, I heard something else. My own breath, but not from me, from outside the building, from down the platform, and I turned slowly and saw the train. It wasn't there, and then it was. Long and black and sleek, like something pulled from a time that never happened. No lights, no markings, no number on the engine, just a void on wheels that extended past where the track should have ended and out into the mist that had returned without warning. I stepped outside, stone in hand, unable to stop myself, and I walked toward the nearest car and felt the static in the air rise like 1,000 voices whispering in reverse. And as I reached for the handle, the door opened without touch, and the steps extended downward like the train had known I was coming. And inside, I saw nothing. No seats, no lights, just hallway after hallway, folding in on each other like a dream, folding into another dream. And at the end, far away but clear, was my reflection. Not distorted, not warped, just wrong, too still, not blinking, mouth slightly open like it had just finished speaking a word I didn't hear. And I dropped the stone. I turned and ran, faster than I ever have, back down the track, back through the tunnel, back to where the line had forked, only to find that the switch was gone. The rails were whole, the path unbroken, no sign of the turn, no sign of the trestle or the gorge or the station, just endless rusted steel and trees full of wind that hadn't been there minutes before. And I fell to my knees, gasping, sweating, my hands covered in dust and blood where the stone had burned me, and I looked at my watch and it said 10:46 a.m. I didn't tell anyone when I got back to town. Not my supervisor, not the dispatcher, not the woman who rents the room upstairs from me and always asks about my trips. I just filled out a report that said the sensor was tripped by rockfall, that no access path was found, that nothing needed repair. I submitted it and took sick leave the next morning, not because I was sick, but because I knew I had changed, not in the way people mean when they say trauma alters you, but in a way that felt fundamental, like the wires that connected me to the world had been rerouted, not cut, not broken, just rerouted. And I noticed things after that, small at first, the way fog would gather around my boots even on dry sidewalks, the way I'd hear faint metal groaning beneath my feet when I stood too long in one place, and sometimes I'd wake at 10:46 a.m. sharp, no alarm, no noise, just my eyes snapping open to that same number on the clock every single time, and when I looked away and looked back, it would have advanced like normal, but I always saw it first, frozen in that minute, like a reminder that I wasn't finished. And I started hearing sounds when I passed old rail yards, the kind that had been shut down for decades. Not echoes, not wildlife, but movement, slow and purposeful, like something with wheels but no engine. something that glided just out of sight and always stopped moving the moment I turned toward it. And the worst was the dreams. They started subtle, just images of the platform, the crate of stones, the open door. And then they became worse. They became loud, not with sound, but with presence, like I was being pressed against the wall of some deep tunnel and made to listen to everything the earth had forgotten, every name, every step, every breath that had ever passed through a mountain. And they didn't come every night, just often enough that I started sleeping during the day, trying to avoid whatever it was that waited in the hours just before dawn. And eventually I stopped sleeping altogether, and one night while lying in bed staring at the ceiling, I heard it again. The sound, not faint this time, not buried, but clear and sharp and close. The tap of stone on stone. 6 beats, pause, 6 beats, pause, over and over until it felt like it was echoing in my teeth. And when I stood and looked out my window, the street outside was gone. Not black, not fogged, just gone, replaced by track, long and silver and polished and stretching through trees that shouldn't have been there. And I watched as a train rolled slowly into view, same as before. No lights, no markings, cars too long, too still, too silent. And when it stopped, I knew it wasn't for anyone else. It was for me. And I stepped back, heart hammering. And then I blinked, and the world was normal again. Cars, pavement, street lamps, silence, and I collapsed to the floor with a single thought burning behind my eyes. It was still waiting. The platform, the crate, the reflection, all of it still waiting for me to return, and I couldn't forget it. Couldn't leave it, because it had already marked me, already pulled part of me away and left it behind like a deposit. And eventually I broke, I went back, not because I wanted to, but because it was the only way I could make the ticking stop. I followed the same route, same trailhead, same incline. And again the fog returned, just like before, thick and high and still. And I walked into it like I was walking into water. And sure enough, after 4 miles, the fork was there again, even though the map still showed a straight line and the turnout was clean, like it had never been buried, like it had never left. And I followed it with no resistance this time. My feet knew the rhythm. The stones felt familiar beneath my soles. And when I passed through the short tunnel, the scratches were deeper now, longer, like something had come back through after me and marked the stone as a reminder. And the gorge waited beyond, and the trestle, and the platform, and the station, exactly as I had seen it before. Not decayed, not aged, just waiting. And I stepped onto the boards and into the open door, and the crate was there, this time empty. And I realized the last stone had been for me, the one I carried, the one that burned, the one I dropped. And I felt a pressure inside my chest, not pain, but anticipation, like my body was preparing for something it didn't need my mind to approve. And the booth at the back of the room wasn't empty, not anymore. There was a figure behind the glass, thin and tall and still. No face, no breath, no sound. And when I stepped closer, I saw its hands, long and narrow and made of something too pale to be skin. And it lifted one and placed it against the window, and I felt the same heat I had when I held the stone. And I knew what it was offering. It was a trade. And I accepted it without speaking, without thinking. Just placed my hand on the other side of the glass and everything went quiet. And I was outside. And the train was waiting. Door open, steps extended, and I climbed aboard. I don't remember the ride. I only remember the sound, not wheels or brakes, but the steady beat of stone on stone beneath me, growing louder as we descended. And we did descend. Not geographically, not physically, but downward through something thicker than air, thicker than fog. And when I stepped off, I was nowhere. Just mist and silence and the faint outline of the station behind me, except now I wasn't on the platform. I was inside the crate, watching through the narrow slats as new footsteps approached. And when they picked me up, I tried to scream, but I had no mouth, no breath, no body, just warmth and memory and the rhythm of the tapping, and then I was set back down, and I waited, and I listened. And now I wait still, inside the crate, with the others. And if you ever find a track that isn't on the map, and the switch is turned the wrong way, and the fog won't lift, remember this: you are not lost, you are remembered by something that waits in the cracks between time and listens for the echo of your footstep on steel.